Hi everyone, it's Kelly Beatty coming to you live from the Senior Center here in North Chelmsford for our third session of the Spring Town Meeting. And boy, what a great couple of nights we've had so far. The first night took a lot longer than I think anybody expected to get through the town's annual budget, but we have that. That's roughly $111 million operating budget that will carry us through fiscal year 2015. Then on Thursday night, as you recall, we spent the entire evening discussing what turned out to be Article 25, which was the citizens petition brought forward by the Sewer Fairness Alliance, having to do with the issue of grinder pumps in the town of Chelmsford. Recall that there were roughly 500 families in the town that during the town-wide sewering were literally forced, to install grinder pumps on their property especially toward the end of the project. Now there's a consensus and a resolution from town meeting that the town will go forward and take over the maintenance of those grinder pumps going forward, with an assessment that we'll all bear to sort of share in that burden. A lot of the details are still to be worked out, but it was a fairly interesting and extensive discussion that was had. I'm sure all sides had a fair say, and we'll move forward from there. Coming up tonight, probably the first article on the agenda tonight, we have, by my count, 16 warrant articles remaining. And the first up will be the 2015 capital budget. This is about $3 million. These are essentially the building projects in town that require outlays to be funded. And we'll hear about those. That might take a little while, but it could go pretty quickly. I think the town meeting representatives are of a frame of mind to try to get everything done tonight. I quickly asked Town Manager Paul Cohen. He says he'll do his part to get us done tonight. The moderator, John Kurland, is hopefully optimistic, cautiously optimistic, I should say, that we'll get done tonight. One of the big issues at the Fall Town Meeting is always the Community Preservation Committee's presentation. This is money that is collected from our property taxes to fund worthwhile projects within the community to enhance our preservation, our conservation lands, and so forth. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 articles having to do with that in one form or another. None of those, I think, are particularly controversial, so those might go through pretty quickly. Following those, we'll have a series of fairly straightforward zoning bylaws, and typically those don't take a lot of time. So, everybody keep your fingers crossed. We should be able to get through this tonight. We can't introduce any new articles after 11 o'clock, so there's kind of a time limit on how long we can be here. In any case, we're enjoying a beautiful evening, and spring is finally here apparently, and hope does spring eternal, and so we have hope that we're going to get done with town meeting tonight and wrap things up until the fall. So stay with us. We'll be with you as soon as John Kurland, the moderator, brings the meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll begin our business tonight. Stay with us, please.
Covering.
Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Are we ready to recognize a quorum, Ted? Now would be the time for you to test your electronic voting device. And while you're doing that, I would like to remind everyone that the fire exits there's 2 on each wall, plus the rear of the building. Also, while we're waiting, I also, on a personal level, would like to again thank Mike McCall for the wonderful job that he did Thursday. You have 7 seconds to vote if you haven't. I recognize that we have a quorum this evening. The first order of business is Article 6, which had been deferred from last Monday evening's warrant to take place after Article 25. So I'll turn this over to our town manager, Paul Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Under Article 6, as a result of the actions on last Thursday evening's town meeting session, we've adjusted the requested appropriation under the Sewer Enterprise Fund by adding $280,000. So we're increasing the expense line to $2,881,406, and the total appropriation under the article to $3,743,003. Just to remind people or inform new people on how an enterprise fund works, an enterprise fund is a separate accounting and financial reporting mechanism for the operation of the town's sewer system, which basically means that it stands alone and that the revenues and the expenditures of the sewer operations are into their own fund with separate financial statements from the other general fund or other government activities of the town. As a result of the requested appropriation, the enterprise fund budget for the upcoming year would increase by 8.8%. As was noted in the discussions on last Thursday evening, there's no certainty in what the initial costs are going to be for the inspections and repairs to bring all these residential sewer grinder pumps up to operating standard. However, during the results of the sewer grinder pump committee, there did appear to be sort of a relatively close agreement between the opinions of the Department of Public Works and the study committee of sort of the ongoing operational cost. And that's sort of how we arrived at the $280,000 figure. So following the meeting last Thursday, on Friday, I consulted with the Public Works Director, Gary Persichetti, and with John Souza, our Finance Director, and we decided that we would stick with this $280,000 figure that we had previously presented to the Finance Committee when it made its consideration last week. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now would be the time for town meeting reps to ask questions of the presenter.
Mary France, Precinct 6. Paul, will that $280,000 be, which line item will that be in, or will it have its own line item?
It will have its own line item. And again, if people want to see the detailed sewer enterprise fund report, it's printed on page 34 of the warrant committee book, which is the thin green book. It's also printed on pages 69 to 70 of the budget book. We will have its own line for the sewer grinder pump maintenance, and therefore we'll be able to track that and report that number to the town meeting at future dates. Now the question then becomes, well, what happens in a worst case scenario if the number goes over or under? If the number goes under from what we estimated and everything else finishes okay within the estimates for the fiscal year, then that number would go into the sewer enterprise fund free cash, because again, it's its own accounting entity. We have approximately $1.2 million in that sewer enterprise fund free cash, so that would obviously add to that, the bottom line. In the event that the number were to go over, again, we would come back at a town meeting in the fall or perhaps as late as next spring and make an adjustment. At that time, we would draw it from the enterprise fund free cash, and therefore that amount would be reduced. So the goal here is once we have that budget increase, we will not and don't intend to raise rates any beyond. So again, we're going with the best estimate, and then we'll adjust either way depending upon reality.
And how do you anticipate raising the additional $280,000? Will that be reflected in the rates, or are you going to do as the grinder pump study committee recommended and assess a flat fee on users?
I've informed the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee at their meetings that my intent is to raise it in the rates. And further than that, what I intend to do is to undertake a study with the Public Works Director and Sewer Division Supervisor and bring in a consultant and basically try to implement a tiered sewer rate system very similar to what is done in many other communities, and is what's done in Chelmsford with our water rates. And what that would do, if we would do it that way, is we would be able to provide some relief to those minimal users, much like they get relief on their water bills. You have a minimum, and therefore the rates increase. So the short answer is we intend to do it within the rates.
Thank you.
Jeremiah Mead, Precinct 6. Mr. Moderator, through you to the presenter. I noticed that the changes are all under expenses, not under personnel services. Does this mean that there will not be a need for increased personnel as a result of Article 25's passing?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, our intent is to put out an RFP for consulting services to perform the maintenance work on the grinder pumps. So we have no intention of increasing any additional personnel budgetary lines.
Thank you.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, through you to the Town Manager. Paul, I have a few different questions. Try and make them quick. You have an OPEB liability in direct expenses of roughly $50,000, I believe.
Yes.
Is that in addition to the $1 million that we funded through the budget?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the answer to the question is yes, and the reason for that is, again, goes back to the fundamental principle.
Oh, no, I understand. I just wanted to see if
The
no,
answer is
that was
yes,
addition.
because it's its own separate count, and when we have the OPEB valuation, we have a separate OPEB calculation for the sewer operations.
Okay. I also see that you've got a $21,000 increase in part-time employees and a $7,000 corresponding increase in employee benefits. So is that part-time position a benefited position that is going to increase our OPEB liability?
They're already there. They're already in it. We can ask Gary or Mike. Mike, do you want to answer the question, or Gary, whoever's most comfortable with that? Right. But no, we're not adding any additional personnel, as we note in our line in the budget.
So if you're not adding personnel, then why is there an increase in part-time employment it's more than doubled?
We have a assistant town engineer, which is broken up between the DPW department and the sewer. So there is no increase as far as another FTE and adding benefits again. The person exists, and part of it is charged off to the sewer division for the work that they do for them as well when it comes to engineering services.
Okay, I don't understand why if we're not adding people, why we're adding $21,000 to part-time employee and why we're adding $7,000 in employee benefits.
Okay, well, that was asked, but I'll allow the town manager to
Through you,
respond.
you also looked at, under the full-time personnel, you see that number's going down. So
Correct.
again, it's just really how the money is allocated within the type of staff within the department.
But still a net increase, but if you can't explain it, that's fine. And then, that's it for now, thank you.
Joanne Anderson, Precinct 6, through you to the town manager, the DPW. Can you, I don't know if I just quickly missed it, can you explain what a tiered rate would mean to me as a consumer?
Sure. It's very similar to you have your water bill. What it is there's a minimal rate, and let's say it's $6 per 1,000 gallons of water.
Up to 25,000.
Up to 25,000, and then if you go beyond that, then it goes to $6.25 to 75,000 gallons of water, and then above that, it would go to $6.50 or whatever.
Right. Yep, I
and the
understand
goal
that.
in that, and why it's done in water and in sewer, is it's to promote conservation. And in this case, not only would it promote conservation, but it also would provide relief as opposed to across-the-board increase for those minimal users who tend to be the smaller households, which in this town tend to be the elderly or other households. So it really is an effort to provide assistance to those who perhaps need the assistance.
And so currently, I've never bothered to do this, but I have a pool that I fill
Yes.
with water that I then get charged the sewerage on. I don't know who can answer this question. How do those of us that would like to get a deduct meter for that do that?
Through you, Mr. Moderator,
Thank you.
the answer to that question is deduct meters are installed by the Water District. That being the case, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, basically in their water withdrawal limitations, they basically penalize the Water District for the installation of irrigation meters. And the reason for that, obviously, is the same thing, they want to promote conservation. And in fact, in speaking to Bob Delaney, who's the superintendent of the Chelmsford Water District, he's telling me that aside from anything, with the new regulations that are coming out, he believes that it may get to the point that people with irrigation systems may only be able to water their lawns once a week. So the bottom line is there's a concerted effort, and it goes to the whole issue of the water basins and their levels and so forth. And so all the efforts, again, are directed towards conservation. And so again, we can't install those meters.
Thank you.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7, through the moderator to the presenter. The $280,000 increase is bringing us to the 8% overall rate increase. What would the rate increase have been without this? Just for clarity, because I think I've heard it two different ways, and I want to be sure we all understand.
3% would have been the rate increase.
So the effect of passing the grinder pump article is 5?
Yes.
Okay, then my second question, if I may, is if I'm recollecting correctly from the Finance Committee hearing, it was estimated that probably about half of this $280,000 was related to inspections. I don't know if I have that right or not, but the point of my question is whether or not, if it's just one line item, you'll know how much is sort of non-recurring versus recurring, because I would expect that if the inspections are decided to be done all in the first year, this cost would maybe be cut in half next year, depending on. Is that the...
Through you, Mr. Moderator, yeah, that's the intent. What we intend to do is to track this diligently in terms of what did it cost us to do the inspections and repairs, and then a separate accounting within the same line in terms of what is it costing us for the routine recurring
okay.
maintenance. So
Thank you.
That's our effort.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5, through the moderator to the speaker. I'll ask the elephant in the room. I think the other night, we were all under the impression it was going to be $150,000 a year for the sewer, impact on the sewer enterprise fund for the passage of Article 25. And yet tonight we see it's $280,000. From previous comments, I understand that's for the inspections. If it's going to go down, why isn't the difference between what we thought we voted on last Thursday and what's being presented tonight, why isn't that difference coming out of the $1.1 million that is in the enterprise fund? Is it free cash? I can't remember which.
It's enterprise fund, free cash. Yes.
Yep. Why isn't it coming from that?
Because the answer is we just don't know. And in speaking to the consensus, it appeared that 280 was the number that everybody came around. And it's, we just don't have a handle on that. And as we all know from last week's meeting and events since then, there's a wide divergence. And it appears that 280 is sort of our best stake in the ground in terms of what that would be. Whether it's, we just don't know.
Okay.
And I think that's the bottom line is, and that's really the number that I sort of felt comfortable with saying, you know what, this is sort of what appears to be the issue of what could recur within a reasonable basis. My sense was between the two differing perspectives, it was about a $35,000 difference, I think, between what the different numbers were. And so we just basically said, you know what, 280 is what it is, and it looks like in any scenario that would be perhaps the recurring cost, again, based upon assumptions. And again, why this is unknown is we're not in a steady state with the sewer grinder pumps. Our system is still aging, and as the system ages, we expect that those costs will increase because more issues are coming out of warranty, and also the existing equipment is older. And so I figured I'd rather play it safe than to come in with a deficit.
Then why wasn't that number given to us and made clear to all of us at Thursday night's meeting? I mean, I think the $150,000 was the number that we heard batted around.
No, I can ask, I don't know if, Tom, you want to speak in terms of the committee, because
if you go back to that page in the presentation, there were two numbers. The top number was 289, and the next number was 150. Those are the two numbers that were given to the town meeting. Now, the town chose the 280 number. That's their prerogative.
Okay, another question I have, since it's such an unknown and we're going out for an RFP, could this addition to the enterprise fund wait till fall town meeting till we have bona fide bids for that service so we have a better idea? It seems like we're voting on no, sorry, that's debate. I won't make that comment. But could it wait till fall town meeting when we have bids in?
But through you, Mr. Moderator, the concern on that is the same thing. We're not bidding a fixed lump sum contract, and I think we discussed this on Thursday evening. We're basically going to put out a contract that's going to pay prevailing wage, and it's going to be for a level of services. And it'll depend on the number of inspections and homes that we can get into. It's going to depend on what they find and what they repair. And also, we can't begin technically until the bylaws are approved by the Attorney General, which could be 90 days from now. So, you know, from the close of this meeting. So at that point, we're not even beginning until August. And so as we come into town meeting in October, we really won't know a lot more than what we do today. And so the feeling is let's go with the best estimate that we have and go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, I want to preface that I'm not against having free cash in case we have an emergency, but I'd like to understand the town's position on the maximum
Why don't you just ask your question and
as a percent or dollar. Do we, because right now it's about 30% of the budget.
Right. The goal of the community, and this goes back to Jim Pearson's time, was to maintain $1 million funding level in the Sewer Enterprise Fund free cash, around $1 million, and that goes back to, I know, 8 years when I started. Obviously, over time, that number hasn't held its own, and so we've seen it nudge up a little bit. What that comes to, again, it addresses the town's unforeseen situations that happen out there in terms of major repairs or unexpected activities that could happen with the fund. Because, again, it's a standalone entity. So that's the basis of the $1 million figure.
Gail Kruglack, Precinct 7. A lot of the cost of driver is a prevailing wage, correct? Being that these are owned and in single-family
Get closer to the
homes,
Okay, go ahead. Yep.
and they're not really owned by the town, is there a way around the prevailing wage requirement?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the answer is no. We've been informed by legal counsel and also our established practice that we have to pay prevailing wage because it's public work. In essence, they're doing the work on behalf of the town. And that's the difference.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. And Mr. Moderator, I stepped back to allow the speaker to speak because I had already spoken. And through you to the town manager, Paul, 2 quick questions. You have a $4,000 line item of outlay that I see is $20,000 down from the previous years, but it's grown substantially since the past 5 years. Can you explain what is outlay?
It's basically capital improvements to the sewer infrastructure system. For example, we'll be putting in $100,000 towards the pump station on Mill Road. We'll also be doing work on Progress Ave and so forth. So in essence, it's part of the whole entity of the sewer operations. So unlike the town budget where we have a separate capital budget and a operating budget, and the enterprise fund, it's all one entirely budget. So that's basically the capital.
Okay, so the outlay is capital improvements or repairs on the system.
Exactly.
All right, and then also just, not to beat a dead horse, but on the $280,000 increase in direct costs for the grinder pump. Obviously, there's going to be some administrative indirect costs that are not factored into this. Do you have any indication as to what you expect those to be?
We have no idea because we have no experience what those are, but our goal will be to incur the operations within our existing staff and our existing overtime budget and basically to manage this thing as efficiently as we can.
No, I understand that, but where there's going to be billing and so forth and meetings with town council and opinions and so forth, do you anticipate that there will be some indirect expenses above and beyond the $280,000 in direct expenses that you're just not able to calculate right now?
Again, it's all speculation at this point. We've got a 2.6, or in this case, $2.6 million a direct expense line. We'll do the best we can, and if we need to tighten on another area, we'll have to do that as best we can. But
All right, okay.
we just don't know.
All right, that's what I wanted to know. That you don't know.
We
All
don't
right,
know.
thanks.
Brian Latan, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, the cost of the Mill Road project, it's only $400,000, or is that a portion of the amount of that project?
You want to come up and speak to that? Because the word Mill Road has serious connotations these days, so I'd rather make sure that we get this clear.
Yeah, the engineering for Mill Road came in at about 50,000, give or take, and that's already budgeted from last year's budget. And also, in addition to that, there was $300,000 on an initial engineering estimate for that. After further study and the initial drawings came in, the current engineering estimate is $400,000, so we added $100,000 to that. So it's currently out to bid. Bid opening will be this month and on the 13th, I believe.
So $500,000?
$400,000.
Oh, $400,000?
Yeah, would be the total. That's what we're looking at. Hopefully it comes in at that figure.
Okay. And the age of that, that joint or the pump station is 24 years? Is that what I understood?
Yeah, the age is one of the factors on the original town design on the sewer system. Before it was expanded to 100% of the town. When it was expanded, there was an additional 4 pump stations that were slated to go and feed into that particular station. That station was never designed to take that part of the whole South Chelmsford into it. So back, I think about 5 years, we had to reroute one of the lines and eliminate one of the pump stations on Acton Road feeding into it. And but there's still additional pump stations on Cambridge, on Tuttle that do feed into it, and the upgrade is primarily to handle the additional flows that were not part of the original design.
Okay, so it's for additional flows. It's not, I don't have to be afraid that we're going to have to replace the entire town sewer system every 24 years at a tune of $160 million.
The typical life of a pump station, again, it depends on the pump station, whether it has a building, it doesn't, underground or not. You're looking at 30-year average life, possibly up to 40 years. So there will be upgrades when the pump stations reach that age, or in this case, if the original design wasn't enough to handle the current flows or the projected short-term flows that are going to be coming to it.
Okay, so this is simply an additive system. It's not needed to be replaced, it's just we need to add some
No,
capacity.
it needs to be replaced because right now we cannot perform maintenance on the wet well part of it because we can't shut the flow down to that station. So, and we did have an emergency earlier this year that basically, I don't know if some of you might remember, there was probably up to 7 trucks out there in a bypass operation to try to keep the flow going so nobody got flooded. And while we tried to do repairs up to that point. Okay. So it was very expensive to do it, and that's what we're trying to avoid, any unnecessary.
But it's unique to Mill Road. It's not unique. It's not the same at the other 24 stations in town. We can expect 30 or 40 years out of those instead of 24. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has any questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now is the time for discussion. Does anyone have any discussion? There being none, we will vote on the issue. Oh, there is someone.
Normally, I don't get up and say anything. Joanne Anderson, Precinct 6. I'm disgusted right now. I think as a homeowner, as a parent with children, I pay enough fees for my kids to go to school, to take a bus, to do a club, to do activities. God forbid, I have a pool, so now I'm going to get penalized for having that too. And we're just expected to just suck this up and be tiered and whatever. I want to know, can I ask a question during debate?
Yes.
If we were to vote no, where will you get this money from? To whomever can answer my question, please.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, if the article fails, then we have no budget to operate the sewer enterprise on July 1.
So you won't even attempt to figure out a way to get the money someplace else?
We recommend to the selectmen and such that we come back to another town meeting before July 1 so we can have a budget to operate the sewer enterprise for the upcoming year. But the bottom line is even if you object to the funding level for which I think is the nature of the question, for the sewer grinder pumps, once that bylaw is passed, The town has the legal responsibility to maintain those, and if we fail to maintain those, then we're gonna run into issues of liability and so forth, because if somebody's grinder pump fails, we have to respond, and if not, then we're gonna incur backups and other issues. So the bottom line is.
The bottom line is we don't have a choice.
We have to maintain it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Brian Latine, Precinct 4. Actually, we have enough funding in the current budget to manage our grinder pump problem, $289,000. It's right here on the line called outlay, and instead of doubling the capacity at Mill Road, you could simply do the necessary repairs so that the thing doesn't back up, and take that $400,000 and apply about $300,000 to residents that already live here. The Mill Road issue is related to putting 120 rental units on top of a hill and doubling the capacity of the Mill Road pumping station to the tune of about $400,000. So we actually have the money here. If we were to vote the original numbers that were in our book, we'd have plenty of money there, and we could come back and look at the Mill Road project perhaps in another year or so, and maybe double the capacity of all the other sewer systems in town as well. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, I don't have a question. I just want to make a statement. I want to remind everybody that the sewer system started in 1976, which is 38 years ago, and was only supposed to be the center, and it has grown and grown and grown. And it came to town meeting 118 times for us to vote to keep it going. So anyway, I just wanted to remind people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Frances McDougall, Precinct 1. I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. We have one other speaker. I will entertain the motion to move it. It's a privileged motion. And okay, so okay, that's fine. Thank you. That'll make it easier.
Just a clarification on the Mill Road pump
Please
station.
identify yourself.
Mike Wasnakis, Precinct 4. On the Mill Road pump station, it has nothing to do with the apartments or the 40B that's going in on Boston Road, on Mill Road, down at the other end. This flows in the other direction. The $400,000 is the repair. That is the repair that needs to be done. We're adding a second wet well and interconnections so that each wet well can be shut down like it is on our large pump stations, so it can be maintained without shutting down the station, which we can't do due to the flow.
Thank you.
Frances McDougall, Precinct 1. I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. No, we don't do that. Yeah. Yeah. So as soon as the screen is up, we will vote. A yes vote means that you want to address the main article. A no would mean you want further debate. An abstention means you don't know what you want. Okay, you have 35 seconds to vote. The motion passes, 131 in the affirmative, 10 no. So now we're going to be voting on Article 6. You are voting on the numbers that are on the screen. as soon as this image comes up. Okay, once again, yes means you're in favor of funding the Sewer Enterprise Fund to the numbers that are on the screen. The article passes, 114 in favor, 26 opposed, and 2 abstentions. We will now be moving to Article 11. I believe.
I don't want to say the word amended, but the figures were changed. Would I still call that a main motion?
It's a main motion.
It is still a main motion, not a substituted main motion.
I mean, generally, I don't know.
Mr. Sousa?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tonight we have the presentation on the FY15 capital plan. I'm just going to fast forward to a couple of these slides. Capital planning is an ongoing process that goes on throughout the year. Each year the cycle begins in the fall for the upcoming fiscal year when department heads update their 5-year capital plans and then submit those for review. The Capital Planning Committee meets seasonally, usually in November and December. And just to go through with you, these are the members of the Capital Planning Committee. Just to recognize them, Dennis Bach is a citizen member. David Braslow represents the Board of Library Trustees. Nick DeSilvio represents the School Committee. John Morrison is a citizen member. I serve as chair. Roy Trable represents the Finance Committee. And then Darlene Lucier, our town accountant, is a non-voting member. The committee holds public hearings, reviews all of these requests in detail, and then works in cooperation with our town manager to develop the annual capital budget. The Capital Planning Committee actually receives recommendations on technology-related projects from the IT, or Information Technology, Capital Advisory Committee, which is made up of the following members. And I'll just run through the list of members for you. Melissa Andrews is a citizen member. Gregory Piper is also a citizen member. Anne Marie Fiore, Director of Educational Technology. Ted Luter, Municipal IT Director. Kathleen McWilliams, the School Business Manager. And I also serve on the committee. And this year I just want to recognize Anne Marie for serving as chair. So it's important that we realize that the IT Capital Planning Committee reviews all of the requests for school and general government technology projects. So each of these technology projects undergoes 2 levels of scrutiny. Moving on, this slide just shows when we're developing the capital plan, it's always important for us to be mindful of the fact that all of our town and school buildings have aged over the years. If you look at this list, you'll see that this is an inventory of basically all of the school and municipal buildings. And if you look at it, you notice that with the exception of Center School that underwent a major renovation during the last decade, all of our other school buildings are much older. Our newest school, if you want to think of it that way, is the high school. That's about 40 years old. And most of our schools, when you review this list, are somewhere between 46 to 57 years old. So the point of this is that as our buildings continue to age, it's important that we be mindful of the fact we need to invest an adequate level of capital to keep the facilities functioning for the future. The Capital Planning Committee the Capital Planning Committee considered projects totaling over $4.8 million for this fiscal year, the coming fiscal year, and the recommended investment is just over $3,074,000. And includes funding in the following areas. Now, in the interest of time, I won't read through the complete list, but you can find it on page H3 of the town manager's budget book. It's about halfway through. It lists all of the projects, and along with the backup detail. Public safety, the recommended funding level is $1.2 million. That's to replace a 2001 Quint with a ladder truck. Another 1/5 of the capital plan is let me go back a slide, is for, to fund school technology and security needs, as well as $100,000 for a consolidated firewall. And the firewall will be a shared resource for town, school, and library use. And then another fifth is funded for public works. About $382,000 goes towards traditional infrastructure type projects such as roadway improvement, sidewalk construction, drainage repairs. And we also want to note that Chelmsford's a very large town geographically, as you know. We have over 230 road miles, so we definitely want to continue to keep up the condition of our roadways going forward. $275,000 of this total funds the replacement of 2 public works vehicles, a heavy-duty service truck and a heavy-duty sander truck. There's also $493,000 funds facility improvements at 2 schools. At Parker Middle School, the main project is the renovation of all restrooms in the building, and these go back to when the school was first constructed in 1965. There's also the replacement of a walk-in refrigeration unit that's used in the school kitchen at the Parker School. And also included in the capital plan is $75,000 for the replacement of the original walk-in refrigeration unit at our high school, which supports that the kitchen facilities there. Oops. So that concludes the presentation. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
Now's the time for question and answer. Before I speak too soon, and of course I had to say that, Mr. Newcomb.
Mr. Moderator, Tom Newcomb, through you to the Speaker. John, a couple quick questions. Are you planning on funding this entirely through debt?
There's the $3,074,000 budget includes, we're going to be using just over $74,000 of recaptured funds from prior year projects. The balance of the remaining $3 million would be funded through a borrowing, yes.
Okay, all right. And I see our non-excluded debt has gone up significantly. Has there been any consideration by the Finance Department or the Capital Plan Committee to propose a capital stabilization fund in addition to our general stabilization fund?
Mr. Moderator, through you to the Speaker, the Capital Planning Committee has not looked at establishing a special purpose stabilization fund. It is important that we, the town has just a measured level of funds that we can devote to our reserves and maintaining our reserves, so it's important that we direct those to the general stabilization fund at this time.
All right. Thank you.
Tom St. Germain, Precinct 7. I'm a bit perplexed about the Highway Department. We're spending $275,000 for 2 trucks and $187,000 for road improvements. $100,000 or less for improving a decrepit, to say the least, road structure. We haven't fixed the potholes for this past winter, and other roads are falling apart, quite literally. How do I reconcile that dichotomy?
Mr. Moderator, answer the Speaker's question. It's important to recognize when we review the capital budget that this is only a portion of the investment that we're making in our roads. In addition to the capital funds, we have around over $1 million in Chapter 90 money that's received from the state for roadway repairs. You also may have heard this year that the state has approved a special one-time supplement in recognition of the just unbelievable winter season that we had and the havoc that it's caused on the roads throughout the state. So the town's actual investment in its roads will be far beyond $187,000.
I don't recall seeing that receipt in the earlier articles about the state receipt, the dollars amounts.
Yeah. It would be a direct expenditure from the state. It wouldn't be shown here in the capital budget.
So it just manna from heaven?
The governor and the legislature approved a special one-time distribution to all cities and towns.
Has that been funded?
I just couldn't hear the, yes.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yes. Bob Joyce, Precinct 1. The $105,000 for the pickup truck, the glorified pickup truck, whatever it is, I'd like to ask through you, Ms. Moderator, to anyone who can answer it. How many years has this been on the list, or is this the first year that it's been there?
Mr. Moderator, that's been, I can speak as chairman of the Capital Planning Committee. That's been on the list for several years. With your approval, I'd like to ask our Public Works Director, Gary Persichetti, to speak to that. I will say that it's not just your average pickup truck. That's something the committee looked at. What it is, it's a heavy-duty service truck with specialized equipment to, it basically serves anytime the DPW has a vehicle that's has an emergency breakdown or whatever on the roads, this truck is sent out to get that truck running again.
Good evening. John is right in what he said. The truck needs to be outfitted with a generator. It comes with an air compressor as well. We have to have a small boom on it because we lift large tires from the backhoes and other pieces of equipment. This is used by the mechanics to go rescue trucks that are broken down within the side of the road or to get them out of an intersection as fast as we possibly can. And the truck, as you can see, is well over 10 years old. Actually, we had a sewer enterprise truck that was going in the auction, and we asked if we can hold on to that truck because our particular truck that was doing this job had frame rot beyond being able to keep it on the road. So we moved a couple of pieces of equipment onto that, which is already was a surplus vehicle, just to get till July 1 in order 1.
Okay, follow-up question to that. Would it be possible to transfer some of the equipment from the existing truck, like a generator and an air compressor and what have you?
Most of the equipment is as old as the truck and does not perform as well anymore. As you know, for years, a lot of our vehicles were stored outside as well as some indoors, so you know that doesn't help. But even now with the new garage and being able to keep it indoors, we believe we should be able to do that in the future with some equipment, yes.
Okay,
From one vehicle to another.
Do you, another question, what is the mileage or the hours on this?
The older trucks do not have mileage on them at all. I mean hours, I'm sorry. They only have mileage, and that particular truck is 71,200 miles on it.
Wow, seems like a baby.
Well, it's a rescue truck, but it's as old as it should be.
Okay, thank you.
John Plunkett, Precinct 4. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the presenter. I just had a question about what happens if one of the purchases comes under what's attached to it. So if one of the trucks, for example, goes out to bid and the purchase price is considerably less than the amounts there, what happens to the funds?
Mr. Moderator, answer the speaker's question. What happens in that case if the price actually is less than what is budgeted here? That would come back to us those are what we call recaptured funds. Those would flow back to us for future year's capital budget, and it would allow us to reduce the next year's borrowing by that amount. So if the truck ends up costing $5,000 less than what's budgeted here, those funds come back to us and we reduce the future year's borrowing or the amount needed by that $5,000.
So this body would not vote on it, it would just roll into
No, if we go back to the regular presentation here, I'll show you in the motion. We're just going to end this. Okay, if we go back. There's a lot of wording here, but basically if you read all of the fine print, what this is saying is it's asking, town meeting is being asked to consider to recapture this amount, and it gives the date of the town meeting. Here's another $22,958 here, and basically this is part of the $74,000. There's $46,000 that we're recapturing up here. So town meeting does have approval on the use of these recaptured funds.
Great, thank you very much.
Anyone else have any questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The majority of the Finance Committee recommends approval.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen voted 4-1 to recommend approval.
Does the School Committee have a recommendation?
The school committee recommends approval of $1,058,000 as subtotaled in school facilities and public education.
Okay, now's the time for discussion, debate.
Mr. Moderator, Sam Chase, Precinct 1. May we hear the reasons for the non-recommendation on this article by both the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen? Thank you.
It was primarily due to the recapturing of the funds, and I'll let Mr. Dukakis speak to that.
We think that the recaptured money should go back to reduce the debt.
The board member who voted against this was Bob Joyce, and he's at the microphone now, and he'll explain his reasonings.
Bob Joyce, Precinct 1. I voted against it because I thought it was a little too rich, and I was originally going to ask for a motion to divide the question so we could take each thing up, but after the last meeting, I don't want it to drag on, so instead I'm going to propose an amendment. And if there's nobody ready to speak, then I'll do it now. I prepared this amendment with the help of John Giorgio Monday night, and I need you to go back to the article.
Mr. Joyce, could we have the amendment so that we can...
I was going to read it, but...
Well, we need to see it, and has it been put on a screen?
Keep his copy so he can read it.
Thank you.
Bob, keep your copy. You do have a copy. Keep your copy. I hope you press firmly. You should be doing that, but it's okay. As long as this goes, okay, yellow, that goes to the amendment.
Mr. Joyce, while that is being typed up on the screen, why don't you explain your amendment?
Okay. The amendment that I'm offering is going to go after the fourth line where it says borrowed. Okay, just to make it clear. Okay, and to transfer $1.2 million from the General Stabilization Fund to purchase the fire ladder truck and to substitute the amount of $1.8 million instead of $3 million as to the amount to be borrowed. So it is instructing the town to take the money out of stabilization. Should I keep talking?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Only if you have more to say. I mean, if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah. This is a way of buying the ladder truck without adding to our debt. And the use of stabilization funds have been used in the past. About 2 years ago, the town manager came in with a proposal to do some work on the then project of the DPW and asked to have a pretty good sum of money. I can't remember the amount, might have been 1.2 million even. But there is a precedent for this. So what this would do is if we were to vote for this motion, it would save the town $132,000 in interest over the 10 years. And one of the other things it does is if we voted here, the transfer from the stabilization, I believe, could be done immediately if the town meeting votes for it. Therefore, the long delivery time on the ladder truck, which according to the chief I spoke to the other night, said could be 360 days. Well, if we could order that immediately upon the dissolution of this town meeting by taking it out of stabilization, then it would arrive in town about three or 4 months, maybe earlier. Like I said, this was done before, and then when we come back in the fall, depending upon what we got left from free cash, seeing that we're not funding any OPEB out of it now, we could then transfer the 1.2 million. If we had 2 million, for instance, we could transfer the 1.2 million back into the stabilization fund. That's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Mr. Cohen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My understanding is...
You have to identify yourself.
I'm Paul Cohen, Town Manager. My understanding is this is the microphone you're supposed to speak for debate and not over there.
You're
so that
absolutely
explains
correct.
my presence here. I would ask the town meeting to reject this amendment. And as the previous speaker noted, the circumstance a few years ago when we took some funding from the stabilization fund was we had higher amounts in the stabilization fund and did that to the project for public works. The situation now is that our stabilization fund is only about 6.2% of our total town budget. Our town policy is to do between 5% and 10%. Obviously, our goal would be around the midpoint. As you can see, we're quite a ways from there. If this article were approved, we'd be down right at the 5% level. And as many in the room know, the town recently had its bond rating increase to AA+, which allows us better access to capital markets and to lower interest rates. My concern is that if we take an action here to reduce the stabilization fund, we could be basically going backwards. But it's not only the recommendation or advice from the report from the our opinion of the Standard & Poor's. I would like to also point out that today the town received a report from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, which upon its arrival I sent to the Board of Selectmen and to the Finance Committee. This was upon a request from the Board of Selectmen to have a review of the town's financial offices. And I'd like to quote from this report, which I believe references the opposition to this type of action. And I'll just be very brief. On page 3 of the report, it notes that Chelmsford's most recent rating increase to AA+ reflects its strong budgetary flexibility, management practices, and manageable debt profile. The town's also higher rating provides easier access to the bond market and reduces overall borrowing costs. Just a few more sentences. Measuring the town's unrestricted reserve levels and overall debt burden against several common financial indicators, we again find Chelmsford to be a well-managed community. In the case of Chelmsford's town reserve policies, they mirror best practice and its combined balance of over 7.1 million or 6.2% of the total budget. Here's the conclusion. As far as Chelmsford's annual debt service is concerned, it stands at about 12% of the total budget. And despite what some might perceive as a relatively high overall liability, over half of the debt is excluded or directly funded through betterments and is otherwise supported outside the general fund operating budget. The town's 20-year debt schedule also reflects a fairly aggressive amortization rate, with nearly 2/3 of its outstanding debt being paid off within the next 10 years. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
We do have an amendment on the floor, so if anyone has any questions or discussion to the proponent, now would be the time to ask. And apparently not. Mr. Joyce?
Yes, I'd like to just reply to a couple of the things that the town manager, through you, to the town manager, and that is that this $1.2 million, just like the DPW, would be returned in the fall. And I think 12% is a very high rate. I haven't looked at other towns, but 12% seems high. And the other thing that I didn't say initially was that this truck that we're replacing is out of service a great deal of time. And it may be even out of service today, I don't know. But by getting it back into town and operational as a brand-new ladder truck, we won't have to gasp and hope that we don't have another Woodcrest that we have to wait for the low ladder to get here. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It's exactly what It's exactly what the town manager proposed for the DPW. The numbers are about the same, except that as a percentage of the budget, it's only 6.2%. Back 2-3 years ago, it was a higher percentage because the budget was lower. So it's all in the numbers. But I don't think it's a lot to ask for 1.2 as borrowing from stabilization and putting it back into stabilization in the fall. Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions?
Mr. Moderator, Bill Griffin, Precinct 9. I'd just like to make a clarifying point to the body. The department and the chief, I've been in front of you before. It's no secret that I support the department very ardently for a variety of different reasons, and they do a lot of work. And I've told you many times about this truck before. But something I do want to clear up, and the selectmen, you know this, having been there for the awards ceremony, there was absolutely, our truck was there that night. It was one of the first trucks in. Lowell augmented our response. The guys did an outstanding job. That happened to be one of the nights that truck was in service. And Bob, I appreciate your standing up and saying to get the truck in, but I wanted to let folks know that on that night, our guys were there.
Ryan Latina, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, I noticed that $1.2 million, if we were to use our funds that we set aside for a special occasion like that, rainy day fund, we would also consider that the fact that we just added $289,000 to our budget. That's the fee budget out of the other pocket that you have compared to your tax budget. I also heard that we have some sewer activity on Mill Road, and we've got some unexpected expenses on Mill Road. We're replacing the road 2 years earlier than expected, in part because we have some new neighbors coming in. Three-story buildings and 120 or so units. This payment would allow us to kind of buy the vehicle in cash, and I'd recommend everybody look at H22, the page there. These trucks are very expensive, and the Quint's been out of action for quite a while because if you do the math, there's 6,000 hours on this truck. Over 14 years, that's 5,110 days, or the truck has been, it runs 1.2 hours a day. Roughly $200 an hour, about $20 a mile. These things are expensive. That's not including maintenance or insurance or gas, any of that extra stuff. It's a good idea possibly to look at this and use our set-aside money that we have already put aside. We did this for retirees. We did this for rainy day fund. We have about $1.5 million in revolving fund balances at the school. All these funds are added together when the state and the bond markets look at us. No, they don't? Okay.
Okay, with all due respect, if you're going to counter someone in debate, I must insist that you go to the microphone. Go ahead.
The taxes and fees that we pay went up tremendously last year when we decided to move ahead with our lighting system improvements. In fact, if you go to Town Hall, you can see that we've replaced air conditioning units in the building. We've also, we're building a whole new section in there for the fire department. The chief's office, I guess, was going to be downstairs, and I don't know where it is now, but we're renovating using funds that we're borrowing. This is an opportunity for us to reach in and take money that we already have set aside for rainy day fund. And I don't think the Quint was, I don't think we defined that vehicle as expiring after 14 years. And personally, I'm very concerned that truck has been out of service as often as it has. When we first started talking about the Mill Road project, I actually approached some selectmen, and they didn't know the vehicle was out of commission at that time. So we need a little bit better communication. I think in this case, this is a good amendment to allow us to use money that we have set aside for the occasion of a special situation and not borrow more money. You know,
Okay,
taxpayers.
Mr. Latino, you are beginning to repeat yourself, so if you have something else to say, I'm more than willing to hear.
Glenn Thoren, Precinct 5. This is a terrible amendment. And you have proof of this being a terrible amendment on Appendix B, page 8. So if you have the thick book and you go to Appendix B, page 8, there's a graph there that shows you what happens when you make it a habit to go in and grab millions of dollars for capital expenditures, which are not a rainy day issue, but it's an issue of having a well-managed budget where you borrow selectively in order to fund it on a continuing basis on the better bond rating interest rates that we would get for the town. If you look at the graph on page 8 of Appendix B, you will see in the years approximately 2004 and before what happens to our stabilization fund when you don't have a good managed budget. It's going downhill fast. And if you just draw that line, you'll see where the stabilization budget goes to zero. Then all of a sudden it turns around. And why did it turn around? Well, there was a change in management in the town. And there was a recognition that the stabilization fund is an important factor in the bond rating that you get and how you manage your town. So unless you want to get onto that curve where we find any reason to grab money out of the stabilization fund, and for those of you who have been town meeting representatives for a while, you remember those opportunities. Take more money, oh, it's just one time, take more money, it's just one time. Then all of a sudden you're going down this hill getting ready for a crash, and what would our bond rating be if we had no stabilization fund? Now that we've turned that around and we're acting responsibly, we want to grab $1.2 million and start that downward trajectory again, and I won't do it. So please vote against this amendment.
John Souza, 88 Carlisle Street, and by way of disclosure, Town Finance Director. Mr. Moderator, I'd like to correct a point of information that was discussed as my role as Chairman of the Capital Planning Committee regarding the Engine 1 and the hours on it. One of the issues that the Capital Planning Committee considered when they looked at the replacement of this vehicle was not only the hours, but the amount of time. Based on the fire chief's testimony, this vehicle was out of service about 16 weeks. If you do the math, that's about 1/3 of the year. So my issue is I want the body to know that the hour meter is not going to be recording if the truck is in a service company waiting for be repaired. So this is a real consideration that we looked at for public safety, and you know, that you can't just look at miles on the odometer or hours on the hour meter if it has an hour meter. You have to really look at the reliability of the vehicle when we're talking about public safety in this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Matt Hansen, Precinct 1. A question for, I believe, the Town Finance Director. Do we earn interest on the money in our stabilization fund?
Mr. Moderator, yes, we do.
Do you know about what % we earn on average?
Roughly, it's somewhere around 2%. The way this year is tracking, fiscal year 14, I would estimate, depending on how we finish the last 2 months of the year, will be somewhere around 140 to 150,000 in earnings.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, through you to the Finance Director. This is a question not entirely related to the amendment, but we have a revolving fund for the sale of police cruisers. I'm assuming that we're going to try and sell some of these trucks and the Quint. Where does that funds go?
That actually has been dealt with in a prior warrant article, and I have to rule you out of order unless you're going to be asking about the issue that is before the...
Just was asking where that money goes in the budget.
It was addressed in a prior warrant article, Mr. Newcomb.
Which one?
You want to know which one?
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, I can provide a response if you allow it. What happens when all capital assets are, they're either traded in, some may be sold at a public auction under Chapter 30B. In discussions with the Capital Planning Committee, the fire chief said they would make every effort to try to, do something with the vehicle to recover some. One of the things that came up is the truck is not in great condition. If it doesn't pass certification tests, then it may have a very minimal salvage value.
Yeah, I was just really wanting to know, does it go back to general funds, or does it go, where does it go? So that was a simple question.
It would go into a revolving fund, and it would have to be appropriated out.
Okay, thank you.
It was actually in Article 10. Yes.
Mr. Moderator, Bill Griffin, Precinct 9. Just to follow up, just a clarifying comment. The way that the process works for these type of vehicles, depending on how this money is appropriated, the chief will still need to work to spec out the truck through whatever vendor. There'll still be a process of generating all of the drawings, reviewing those drawings and beginning to build, and then going out to take acceptance of the vehicle. That's generally how this works. And Bob, I really do appreciate your desire to get it in. I do, man. I'm glad somebody's pulling, because this is a terrible thing to have. But at the end of the day, it won't be a huge difference. It's not like we get it in, 5 months difference time. It just doesn't work that way. I can appreciate that, my only other comment is, with a piece of emergency equipment being out of service, folks, if this wasn't, I'm conflicted by Bob's amendment. If there was ever a need for a rainy day event, your safety of your community is it.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, I just want to reinforce Representative Thoren's remarks that I remember back in 2000.
We do try to avoid using names, so you can
all
say
right.
the previous speaker.
I beg your pardon. Anyway, I was here in 2000, in the early 2000s, and our stabilization fund was down to $2 million because whenever we had an overrun or something, it will take it out of the stabilization fund. I just don't think it's a good idea. I would vote against this amendment.
Thank you. I'm waiting for you.
Oh,
I can listen while I'm actually looking at writing stuff.
I like you to look at me. Francis McDougal.
I like to look at you too, Fran.
I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. So we'll get the screen. Move the question on the amendment. That's correct, yes. So you're voting on whether or not to approve the amendment that... Oh, no. You're voting on whether to end debate on the amendment that was proposed by Mr. Joyce. Thank you for being so quick to correct me. So the motion passes 133 in favor, 7 opposed, 1 abstention. So now we are voting on the amendment. A vote in the affirmative would be to change the number so that $1.2 million would come out of stabilization fund and the capital borrowing would be reduced by that same number. The amendment fails. 22 in favor, 121 against, no abstentions. Now we are voting on the actual capital budget that had been initially proposed. Yes, we're going to vote on that. So that's the original numbers, which is $3,074,694.
You might recall from the discussions on the fire station alcohol that some of our trucks have to be specially designed, have had to be specially designed to fit under the narrower, shorter doors that existed in the center of town.
The article passes, 128 in favor, 14 opposed, 1 abstention.
Presumably, the new fire station.
Now we move to Article 12.
Standard issue fire truck. Expensive as a fire truck.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 12 is the annual article that appears before the committee town meeting. It's to transfer funds from the sale of graven lots to the cemetery improvements and maintenance. And this year, the Cemetery Commission is seeking $50,000 to go towards the improvements over at Pine Ridge Cemetery. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moderator.
Thank you. Now would be the time to ask any questions of the presenter. Am I premature in saying there are none? Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now is the time for discussion. Anyone wish to discuss this? There being none, a vote yes is to recommend, is to approve the transfer of $50,000 from the sale of graves and lots to the Cemetery Improvement and Development Fund.
Again, this is the first of a series of amendments that could go fairly quickly. The one after this, Article 13, we'll discuss the Community Action Program Fund, and then from there we'll dive into a series of amendments having to do with the Community Preservation Committee's funding
And it
for
passes
next year
unanimously,
and its
140 in
recommendations.
favor, no opposed, and no abstentions. Article 13.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 13, we're seeking to raise and appropriate $10,000 to the Community Action Program activity. The Community Action Program was first established by this town meeting back in 1996. Since that time, its inception in 97, they've awarded projects to 69 different participants and totaling over $77,000. And the type of programs, and you've seen improvements, have to do with places such as Harmony Park, Varney Playground, and a variety of Eagle Scout projects. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. Now is the time for question and answer. Does anyone have any questions? Appearing that there are none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now's the time for discussion. Anyone wish to speak for or against the article? There being none, we will vote. The article is unanimously approved, 141 in favor, no opposed, and no abstentions. Now we go to Article 14.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Bob Morris. I'm chairman of the Community Preservation Committee, and we have 6 hopefully quick articles in front of you tonight. The first one is Article 14, which is the required reservations for the Community Preservation Fund for the year. We're anticipating collecting $860,000 in surcharge this year. It's a 1.5% surcharge on the property tax. And we're also anticipating receiving $210,000 in state matching funds from the fiscal 2014 collection. It's worth noting that last year we were anticipating getting a little over $200,000, but thanks to a change that happened in the Community Preservation Enabling Bylaw, the $25 million of the surplus, the first surplus money from last year's state budget, went to fund additional community preservation matching funds. So last year we got a match of $427,872, which is about a 52% match. That same legislation is working its way through again. It's passed through the House and hopefully work its way through the Senate. And with a surplus, we'll see the same benefit next year. So pay your local and state taxes. This is just a breakdown of the required set-asides that we put aside each year: 10% for open space, 10% for community housing, 10% for historic. We're putting aside $50,000 for administrative, and there remains with $200,000 that we'd like to put in budgeted reserves. Just a further breakdown showing that the revenue, administrative, our debt service, which we'll go into a little more detail, the warrant articles, and the debt service that uses the set-asides, the $107,000 set-asides. So that adds up to the $200,000 that we're requesting for the budgeted reserve. This is our debt payments that we're making for the big projects that we passed. The biggest one is the $2.8 million bond for the town halls. There are payments out to 2021. Our payment this year is $366,800, so 6 more years, and there'll be a lot more funding available for the bigger projects. Also, we're paying off the bond for the Sheehan Farm, which is a 10-year bond out to 2023, and the payment this year is $104,300. We took a 15-year bond for the Chelmsford Woods Affordable Housing Project on Littleton Road, and that's going out all the way to 2029, and a payment of $140,068. And also turf fields, also to the year 2029, $1.2 million bond, and the payment is $351,000. And that's it for my presentation. So.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Now's the time for question and answer. Does anyone have any questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously approves.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Any discussion? There being none? Got 35 seconds to vote. A vote in the affirmative is to approve the appropriation. The article passes unanimously, 139 in favor, no opposed, and no abstentions. Article 15.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 15 is an article to return unused CPC account money back to the CPC fund. So as you can see here, we have amounts for Hill Jock, Sunny Meadow, 1802 Schoolhouse, Acton Road land acquisition, Red Wing Farm parking, and the Center Village master plan totaling $5,093 to be returned to the CPC funds, and those accounts will just be closed out. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for the presenter? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen,
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
anyone have any debate? There being none, all in favor of Article 15 or opposed, please, or abstain, please vote. The article passes unanimously, 138 in favor, no opposed, and no abstentions. Article 16.
Article 16 is to appropriate $15,000 from the Community Preservation General Fund. This is a article requested by the Conservation Commission to do a study for the repair, replacement, or rebuilding or removal of the Crooked Spring Reservoir Dam. Probably many of you are familiar with the Crooked Springs Reservation. There's a large body of water there that's impounded by a dam. And in the last summer, the dam apparently is leaking. The thought is that the low outlet of the dam, low-level outlet of the dam is seeping, so the dam is periodically, it's draining down, and the lovely pond gets reduced down to something less than lovely. This is a couple of pictures of the dam itself. The dam on the left, and then to the right there's a picture showing some holes that are present in the lip of the dam, which is something else that needs to be addressed. So this article is to do a study of the dam and to come up with the available alternatives that would be available for restoring it, repairing it, or removing it, or for just, and also alternatives for restoring the dam itself and the pond. The idea is to avoid patches. The structure's been looked at over the last summer. The standpipe was looked at and partially replaced, and the thought is that we're still going to continue to have problems with the dam as the summer progresses. Right now it looks great because there's lots of water coming into it, and so it looks full, but inevitably it's probably going to drain down again. So this article is to do a study of the dam, have an engineering company come in, do a full analysis and site evaluation, and come up with a list of costs for restoration, costs for removal, costs for repair, and to go through the process of coming up with the best alternative, the best uses for to repair it or remove it, or what the result would be. We also have Chris Garahan and Allison LaFleur to answer questions that I might not be able to answer.
Thank you. Now's the time for question and answers. If anyone has any questions of the presenter or the members from the Conservation Commission or Conservation Agent.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, to the presenter. Can you, I don't know who's going to answer these questions, but is in part of this study you're asking or evaluation to be done, are you including dredging in that study? Because that pond should have been dredged probably 20 years ago and was not.
Through the moderator, yes. We are looking at essentially a menu of options so that we could say, I mean, dredging is going to be a very big cost. So we want to know what that cost and the permitting for dredging as well as all the other alternatives would be.
Right. I have an additional question, Mr. Moderator. The standpipe, so-called, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the problem with that is it was silting up from all the silt that's in that pond now.
I don't think that's the full problem. That might be part of it. Actually, the silt is why we have water in it at all, because it's a clay pipe is what we know has at least failed. At a minimum, a clay pipe that's 70 years old has failed.
Mm-hmm.
It is still filling because the silt and sediment will essentially plug that pipe until the water pressure gets to a point that it flushes it.
Okay.
So
I have one more, and that's it. Will they also, if they dredge it, will it make it possible that we will have a current in there so that moving water will not allow all the debris that's growing in there, all the invasive species?
that's something that will be determined as part of the study, is to what level it should be dredged, how much it can be dredged, looking at kind of some upstream mitigation for the siltation. That's all part of the study.
Right. If you bear with me, one more question. Can we make it so that the water level just goes over the dam rather than going through that thing? Because that's how it used to be. In the past, it was, when it reached the top of the dam, it went over.
And that's what it is, and that's what it will do. The low-level outlet is essentially, if you think about the pond as a bathtub, the low-level outlet is that drain. So you have, usually up by the faucet, the overflow, but then there's also the drain. It's our understanding that you're not really permitted to impound water without having some ability to drain it if we need to.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Dave Hadley, Precinct 3. If we approve this study, will this come back to us to help make the determination of what's going to happen to that pond, or is that something that will happen, without our understanding of what's going to happen there after the fact?
Well, one of the main reasons for the study is to find out what the costs are involved, and it's unlikely that, unless it was very minor, that it would not require some action through town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And just additionally...
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. When the study is returned that we're about to fund or not fund, when the study is returned, it will require a decision from somebody to move forward and do something. So as part of the study, who ultimately, Mr. Moderator, who ultimately makes the decision on what gets done?
Mr. Thorne, Mr. Moderator, Chris Garahan, Vice Chairman of the Conservation Commission. Good question. Basically, it's a shared responsibility. The Conservation Commission, once the study is completed, will have a public hearing, and we'll get input from the public, and we'll review the analysis, and at some point, the commission will then take a vote based on the results. But we'll still have to come back to this body for any appropriation or any financial impact that might come from that study. So it's really a shared responsibility.
Thank you very much.
So those are the questions and answers. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now's the time for discussion.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the presenter, Pat Magnell, Precinct 8. I remember going back several months attending a public meeting where the initial conception of this study didn't include the option of repair. If it had come to this body in this form, I'd be standing up here in opposition to the article because we would have been studying two pretty drastic possibilities. One very expensive and one very drastic and downright ugly. But mercifully, it does include the option of repair. I live in Precinct 8, and the Crooked Spring Dam is only a 5-minute walk down the street from my house. So I have to admit, I have a real stake in this. I hope those of you in town, I hope many of you have seen the pond created by the dam. If you've seen it, you know one thing is true. It's beautiful. It's an asset to the town, and why would we ever remotely consider dispensing with an asset that has more than monetary value? But unless you think I am prejudiced because I live near it, I want to draw your attention to a page I saved from the Chelmsford Independent, which when I saw it arrive in my mailbox, I said, I have to save it because it's going to come in handy. And it is, at the time of Winterfest, Crooked Spring Pond takes front and center, front page, color photograph, beautiful picture of a father and his daughter skating on the pond. I know that the study hasn't been done, but I do hope that it gives thorough and rational consideration to all options, because if the doomsday option occurs, you won't be seeing Winterfest happening like this again. Thank you. I look forward to the study, and depending upon the outcome, I'll probably be back. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? There being none, this vote is to appropriate $15,000 for a feasibility study regarding Crooked Spring Dam. The article passes 140 in favor, 1 opposed, and no abstentions. Article 17.
Article 17 is to appropriate $18,000 from the Community Preservation Fund to hire a professional preservationist to conduct historic
Mr.
inventories.
Morris, can you please speak into the microphone a little bit better?
So this article was requested of us by the Historic Commission. The Historic Commission is responsible for doing the inventories of the town's historic assets. And they have done a tremendous job over the years, and as you can see, there's a link there where you can look at the many dozens, possibly 100 or more inventories that have been done of the historic homes of the town. It's all been done by volunteers up to this point, and they need some help. There's getting to be a backlog of inventories, and there's the need to perform more detailed inventories of that involve the architectural and cultural components of the sites that they're inventorying for the purpose of preservation restrictions, which are needed on a few different sites. This was a recommendation from the Chelmsford Historic and Cultural Preservation Implementation Plan that this body heard about a year ago, and this article would appropriate the money to move forward on one of the goals of that plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Now's the time for question and answer.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, you to the presenter. Would this study include what to do with all this historic documentation once we document what we have, or is this just to document what we have?
It's for the purpose of conducting the historic inventories.
So it would not deal with archiving it at all?
No, not this warrant article.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen,
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
now's the time for discussion. If anyone has any comments on this warrant article?
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, from you to the presenter. I believe I was on the Chelmsford Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee, and for reasons of explaining what this is to this body, we have many houses in town that are really old, go back to the 18 and 1700s. A lot of those do not have inventories yet, that have not been done, and it's very important that we do inventory them so that when it comes time for any question about removing or that sort of thing, we have all the inventories there. So I would urge everyone to vote yes on this.
Thank you. Any other discussion? There being none, vote in the affirmative is to authorize $18,000 from Community Preservation General Fund to perform historic inventories. The article passes 136 in favor, 5 opposed, no abstentions. Article 18.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We're almost there. Article 18 is to appropriate $2,000 from the Community Preservation General Reserve to purchase and install historic or road signage to denote historic areas in our town. This is from the Historic Commission also. This is, I was noticing an example of the sign that was sitting up here near the podium a few nights ago, I think on Monday night's town meeting. This was just a picture of a sign that I took on the Middlesex Turnpike that's sort of indicative of the type of sign or the look of it that they're requesting. These historic markers would denote the entrances to 3 of our villages, to the West Chelmsford, North Chelmsford, and South Chelmsford villages. And this is just noting the proposed locations of the signs. And it's just to emphasize that you're coming into an area that still retains parts of its historic central character, and to give it some importance. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Moderator.
Any questions for the presenter?
Mr. Moderator, Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. I'd like to ask what these signs are, what's the expected lifetime of these signs, and how will they be maintained?
I would, yeah, oh, there's an example of the sign over there that we're talking about. I don't believe they're going to be wooden. I think they're going to be made of more long-lasting materials, so I would think would be quite some time.
Is there anybody that can give a definitive answer of that?
I don't know if,
Apparently not.
a long time.
Laura Merrill, Precinct 2. Mr. Moderator, from you to the presenter. How are you going to affix these signs? Are they going to be on existing utility poles, or are you going to put a pole in somebody's lawn?
This is Bill Nolan from the Historic Commission.
My name is Bill Nolan. I'm the Vice Chair of the Historical Commission and have done some of the work on the signage throughout the town, mostly on the houses. But there's a sample of the sign over here, and it is weatherproof, and the lettering is the kind of lettering that will be stable for many years. I assume that when these signs are made, the DPW would install them properly along the roadsides. They would not be in people's yards. They would be in the thoroughfare, and they would be at the entrance of 3 of the villages in town.
Thank you.
Nick, hold it up.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, a question for the speaker. I don't know if it was accidental or intentional, but there's nothing there for Center Village, which I think is one of the most important places we have.
Well, it's not a part of this particular article, but they're like everything else. These things can be amended.
Thank you.
Maria Carafellis, Precinct 2. Can someone tell me Princeton Street between Pleasant Street and railroad tracks? Where is that? Where are the railroad tracks on Princeton Street or Pleasant Street?
Pleasant Street is in the west.
Okay. Because I didn't realize. Okay, so you're counting that as tracks on Princeton Street then, the one that goes under the bridge.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for the presenters? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now's the time for discussion.
Laura Merrill, Precinct 2. I live 2 doors down from the corner of Dunstable and Swain Road. It's a neighborhood kind of community, and right now in that corner there's 2 stop signs, an LRTA bus stop sign, 2 street signs which are now in the new historical logo. I don't know what that costs the town, and a not a throughway sign. I'm not really sure how that sign, as beautiful as it is going to make it look more like a village. Once a sign goes up, it's going to be there forever. We're going to have to maintain this sign. I know it's not a high-ticket number, but it's money, and I prefer not to spend it. A sign doesn't make an area a historic village. It's the actual maintenance of these buildings that make it historic. They should advertise themselves. And as a final point, I'd like to note, I think a similar proposal must have gone up in Westford a few years ago for scenic road signs. Nothing tells me that's a scenic road like a metal pole in the ground and a metal sign telling me to look at the scenery. I urge you all to vote no on this article. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, could I just respond?
You would have to get in line.
Ruth Monahan, Precinct 3, and a resident of West Chelmsford. I would personally be very happy to see the signs go up, Westford currently has 2 signs pointing to West Chelmsford, but I find that even a lot of the people living in West Chelmsford do not know they live there. They think they live in North because that's where they moved the post office. I often wonder if the post office had stayed at the corner of School and Main, would all the North Chelmsford folks think they lived in West Chelmsford? So I'm urging that you please do vote for this.
Yes.
Hi, Mr. Moderator. Bob Morse, citizen of Chelmsford and chairman of the Community Preservation Committee. Just to respond to the one of the previous speakers, and a point I didn't make is the Historical Commission is open to suggestions as to locations and specifics of the locations of the signs, and would welcome any input from the town residents.
Thank you.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, to the speaker. I have just been reminded that if I don't ask to have entering the historic Chelmsford Center Village on that article, it won't get done. Is that correct? Are those the only 3 signs you're talking about?
The Warren article does not have the specific locations. So I would, as I was speaking before, talk to the Historic Commission, and I'm sure they'll listen. One point I was going to make was for the town center is that since it's the historic district and there are entrance signs already, I would think that any kind of effort there would need to be done in concert with the historic district.
Yes. The signs there are on buildings. There is one on Fishbones, I believe, that's, no, it's on the Oddfellows that says entering Chelmsford Historic Center. And also Fishbones has it on their building. So I'm not saying any post or thing, but I didn't know whether I had to put it on an amendment on that in order to get it done.
Mr. Moderator, it's just a general statement to install road signage to denote historical areas in the community, so I would not think that it requires any amendment.
Thank you very much.
Any further discussion? There being none, you're voting to appropriate $2,000 from the Community Preservation General Fund reserve to purchase and install road signage somewhere to denote historical areas in the community.
Careful viewers out there might note that there is an East Chelmsford as well, but there is no village per se. Having lived there many years, there's no real locus to it. So that's going to have to wait for another day, I
The article
suppose.
passes 124 in favor, 16 opposed, and 2 abstentions. Article 19.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Our last article, Article 19, is an article that would replenish the Recreational Capital Improvement Fund that this body passed about a year ago, where we put aside $50,000 for recreational capital improvements. When the CPA bylaw, Chapter 44B, was altered to allow the use of funds for recreational, that we realized the need to construct a fund that would handle the smaller projects that would be coming in. We wanted to encourage use of smaller projects. So we set aside $50,000, and that fund was for public playgrounds, parks, recreational fields. We typically ask for matching funds for the applications for this fund, and we quickly had a few applications. One from the McCarthy middle school for benches and a playground structure that went in at McCarthy Middle School. Our first applicant was actually the South Row School, which I apologize I don't have a picture of, but I did go down there twice to take pictures, but everything was in use by the kids, and I didn't think would be a popular idea to start shooting pictures of kids on the play equipment. One other use of it, we had an application from the Dog Park Association for $10,000 that is going to be used for constructing the dog park. It was used to leverage and to receive over $200,000 in funding that will be used for putting the dog park together and to get it in use. So that was just an example of how leveraged the funds can be. So we want to get ahead and replenish the fund and get ready for additional projects. Thank you, Ms. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. And now is the time for question and answer. Does anyone have any questions for the proponent? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now is the time for discussion. Apparently there's no discussion, so now's the time to vote on Article 19, which is to appropriate $50,000 from Community Preservation Fund General Reserve for the rehabilitation and restoration of land for recreational use.
Unanimous, yeah.
The article passes, 134 in favor, 5 opposed, no abstentions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Article 20.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 20 is a article regarding the dog licensing provisions of the town. The article was prepared by our town clerk, Honorina Maloney, and Eric Merrill, our dog officer, who's in the back of the room this evening. And basically, it follows from the massive revision of the state law that was approved by the legislature going back into fiscal year 2012. At that time, we had to amend our dog bylaws. You remember, we had to create a separate fee for altered or unaltered dogs. And then at this point this evening, we're sort of continuing the update of our bylaws to conform with the state law. Believe it or not, in the state legislation, they actually set a minimum fee for the replacement of dog tags at $2. So our $1 fee has to go up to $2. Similarly, we also have the town meeting has to set the licensing fees, which previously, as I mentioned earlier, were done by the town clerk. Also, the state raised the violation fee, minimum fee, to $50 for an unlicensed dog from the $25. And also the penalty for the failure to license dogs increases from $10 to the new state penalty of $20. So that's basically the actions here. There is a little bit of discretion in the bylaws, and you see that there. And it really has to do with the violations of the law. And at this point, I'll stop the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now's the time for questions and answers. After questions and answers, you certainly may.
No, it's already in. She has an amendment.
No, I understand,
right.
but
Okay.
the procedure is we'll do questions. Nobody has any questions and answers anyway. So now, or do we? We do have some questions.
Dolores Miller, Precinct 2. In 2013, there were 3,700 licensed dogs in Chelmsford, generating $55,500 in licensing fees. Where does that money go?
goes to the dog licensing fund, which we spoke of earlier this evening regarding the, earlier session of town meeting regarding to the dog operations. And that will go back to that Article 10, which is the revolving fund.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee has no recommendation on this article.
Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Ms. Logan?
Hi, oh, there it is, thank you. Okay, so I just want to preface this with, I have dogs. This is not an anti-dog thing. This is about responsibility. For those who know, the current law is $10, which really has no teeth. This amendment makes the offenses for failure to remove animal waste similar to other neighboring towns. If you litter, the violation is $300, but if you leave dog waste at the moment, it's $10. That seems a little out of whack. Some people will say animal waste is biodegradable. It is. Herbivores, cows, horses, etc., 3 days. Usually don't have a lot of parasites and stuff. Omnivores and carnivores, that's you, me, dogs, cats, etc. It can be months. I've seen it, so it is not really quickly biodegradable. It's irresponsible people who don't pick up. The responsible dog owners do. Many of us carry bags all the time. It's also irresponsible dog owners that then would not pick up, bring a sample to the vet to make sure their dog has no parasites. Some people may also talk about wildlife. There's over 3,000 dogs licensed in town. We have maybe 300 wild omnivore carnivores in town, and some of them travel to other towns. They don't know barriers. They also tend to stay off places where humans are. Dogs tend to stay with humans on the trails, and these are places I have seen dog gifts in the last 6 months. Conservation land, playgrounds, sports fields, my neighbor's driveway who has no dog, and my favorite was town center about 50 feet from Fishbones. Lovely way to introduce people to the town. I think some people will say this is hard to enforce. We all have cell phones with video. Go to town if you see somebody. Changing this sends a message to the few irresponsible people in town, and I think we need to send them that message. And my final comment on my amendment is, if you are unwilling to change a diaper, do not have a child, and if you're unwilling to pick up your animal's waste, don't have a pet.
Thank you. Do you have any discussion on the amendment? There being none, we are now going to be voting on the amendment, which is just to vote to whether to increase the numbers that are in red from the... Mr.
I just want to make sure people understand this is a friendly amendment, so it's in favor with what we're looking for.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. So, we are going to be voting on the amendment only at this time. Okay, the amendment passes 115 to 22 opposed and 2 abstentions. 23. There was no timer in the corner, so. And 2 abstentions. Thank you. So now we get to the main article as amended. We have some discussion
I have a quick
or questions.
On page A9, why is it
Please identify yourself.
Pentassi Precinct 2?
Thank you.
Why is it less to kennel your dog? Why is the fees less for a veterinarian?
Page 89. Mr. Merrill, can you answer that?
Could we repeat that, please?
Why is it more for veterinarian, why is it less for veterinarian to get a license versus more being with commercial or domestic?
Because they're potentially, a lot of them as clients.
Would you please, Mr. Merrill, would you please speak into the microphone?
Sorry. Veterinary kennels are not potentially always making money just from kenneling. Some of it is their patients. So it's, some of their fees and stuff are dropped due to the fact that it's not a strictly, every dog that goes in gets, is for pure profit.
Thank you. Any additional discussions or questions on the main article? If not, we will vote on Article 20. And that's as amended by Ms. Logan. The amended article passes, 136 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 abstentions. There's no action on Article 21, so now we will be going to Article 22.
I don't remember.
Good
Mr.
evening.
Belansky.
Evan Belansky, Director of Community Development. Just going to forward through the motion. Okay, Article 22 amends the floodplain zoning district within the Chelmsford zoning bylaw. This is essentially a housekeeping article done every 4 to 5 years as required by compliance as part of the town's participation in the FEMA federal flood insurance program. FEMA produces the maps based upon their own methodology. This was last done in 2010. If you recall, there were significant revisions as part of the Merrimack River watershed. So the specific key points as it relates to this particular article revises the specific references to the new floodplain maps that are due to become effective July 1st, 2014. During the planning board public hearing process, the town engineer reviewed the maps and indicated that there were minor adjustments to both the floodplain and the associated elevations. These revisions are focused on the Concord River watershed, specifically along Beaver Brook and Putnam Brook, and as indicated, no major or significant impacts. Essentially, there are no changes in North Chelmsford. And as you can see from the slide, there are slivers being added and slivers being removed from the floodplain. Specifically, the red color indicates floodplain being added, and green indicates floodplain being removed. Beaver Brook is on the lower left-hand corner, and Putnam Brook is essentially in the lower middle section of the slide. This concludes presentation on Article 22.
Thank you, Mr. Belansky. Now's the time for question and answer. There is. Evan, can you go back to Article 22 so people can read the text? Mr. Thorne?
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. Can you enlarge that a little bit? Because it really is impossible to see some of the details on this map.
Are you able to from over there?
Can that be done technically?
We've had a board out back at the entrance for the last
Fine,
two
thank you.
sessions.
I'll retract the
But
question.
we
I'll
can-
spend a minute looking at the board more carefully.
We can, if you tell me what part.
I'm interested in the floodplain changes along 110 there. There's a variety of floodplains on either side of 110 coming in from Westford. But I will look at the map, so I won't waste your time.
All right.
Any additional questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have Mr. Fall?
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. How many parcels of land would this be involved in total in the town?
We didn't calculate the individual number of parcels. It'd be possible to do, but it would be fairly cumbersome. We thought that a graphic like this and publicizing that this graphic was available would be beneficial. But I don't have an exact number of specific properties. What I can say is that when we did a closer review of the changes, most of the floodplain being added is already a wetland resource area. So it's very unlikely that any existing structures, particularly a single-family home or a habitable principal commercial structure, would be included in the floodplain. In the unlikely event that an existing structure were to be added to the floodplain, it'd most likely be like a shed in someone's backyard or an outbuilding of some sort. But it's very, very unlikely that any new principal structures would be added to the floodplain.
Once again, Mr. Moderator, sorry, to the presenter. How would this affect floodplain insurance?
Well, if you're added to where either part of your property or all your property was not in the floodplain, and this FEMA revision puts you in floodplain, where there is a structure, your mortgage company would require you to have flood insurance.
Thank you.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7. Just a clarifying question on the heading. It says draft 2014 floodplain maps. Why is it draft?
It's draft because the federal FEMA maps do not become effective until July 1st, 2014.
So is there a possibility that any of this will change?
No. FEMA has issued their final maps. That's what's being voted on this evening. But they don't, like I said, they don't become effective until July 1st.
George Ripson, Precinct 4. Evan, excuse me, through you, Mr. Moderator. Is one of those red spots on Mill Road?
No, it does not appear so.
Thank you very much.
Carol Kelly-Selesky, Precinct 5. Should there be a dwelling on what we're adding to the floodplain? Whose responsibility is it to notify the owner? Is it ours as a town? Is it FEMA?
Sure, it's a good question. As many people probably know in the room and in the community, unfortunately, you'll receive a letter from your mortgage company, and that's the first time that a property owner will receive any official notification.
Hi, Colleen Stansfield, Precinct 6. What happens if we don't adopt this?
If the community chooses not to adopt this, Chelmsford property owners would not be eligible for federal flood insurance. So this is not the first time that the town meetings voted on an article like this. Fortunately, Chelmsford has been a long participant in the federal flood insurance program.
Great, thanks.
Any additional questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee has no recommendation.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Any discussion? Oh, Planning Board, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Planning Board unanimously recommends this article.
Thank you. Any discussion on the warrant article? There being none, vote in the affirmative is to approve the new floodplain district plan to be in compliance with the federal plan.
What section?
The article passes, 135 in favor, 2 opposed, no abstentions. Article 23.
Let's present the article. Article 23 is the Village Center Overlay District. Although it's a fairly lengthy motion, my PowerPoint presentation is 9 slides. I'll go through it fairly rapidly so we have time for any questions. You able to do that? Bring it to the, okay. So just some background to set the stage. This was over a 2-year process to get to this point. This is a recommendation of the 2010 master plan as well as the 2011 affordable housing plan. The zoning bylaw review committee over the last year has worked directly with a zoning consultant. There was a coordinated effort in which we waited for the Center Village master planning process to be complete. So this effort has been coordinated with that planning process. Final implementation builds upon the prior approval from last fall, 2013, of the Community Enhancement Overlay Investment District by town meeting, which has received Attorney General's approval. General key points is that this article mirrors the same guiding principles from the overlay from 2013 fall town meeting. It is a key implementation strategy for the Center Village Master Plan. Specifically, it takes the best from the underlying Center Village zoning district and builds upon those positive attributes. It addresses existing deficiencies within the existing underlying zoning district, such as lack of residential and dimensional requirements. And it is finally further customized beyond the overlay from 2013, specifically to serve the Center Village, such as preserving, promoting, enhancing existing special qualities of our town center. So in a nutshell, the fairly lengthy and complicated article can be summarized as follows. It prioritizes redevelopment over new development. It incentivizes redevelopment to make it financially feasible and a first choice. It increases the public benefits, both on-site and off-site, of development, such as increasing architectural quality so that it's compatible with the Center Village. It obtains the associated benefits of redevelopment, provides for regulatory flexibility for dimensional parking and landscape standards that are customized for Center Village style development, and finally provides for consolidated and streamlined permitting. Key points: this is an overlay district, so it does not change the underlying zoning. It is voluntary participation by a property owner or an applicant. It requires upfront planning board approval to participate. It strengthens the planning board regulatory authority as it serves as a one-stop shop where the planning board is able to negotiate the entire project. Thereby, it creates a partnership between the applicant and the planning board. It provides an opportunity to address specific abutter and neighborhood concerns, and that's strengthened again by the planning board being the sole permitting authority. This article advances historic preservation. It requires compliance with architectural and site design guidelines. The article requires the project to be a better option than the underlying zoning would provide. For example, it would minimize impacts such as square footage, traffic, paving. You'd have improved design, such as side and parking to the side or rear, less curb cuts on the main road, and they would result in a public benefit, such as pedestrian amenities, shared parking, open space, and enhanced landscaping. This slide is the proposed Village Center Overlay District. As you can see, the dark blue or purplish line is the proposed overlay. It consists of 6 separate underlying zoning districts within a quarter mile. The overlay will consolidate development into a unified manner within the overlay. It would minimize conflicts between underlying districts and land uses. So as you can see, the overlay includes the existing Center Village zoning district, and it is expanded to the north along Chelmsford Street up to Fletcher Street, and then returns around North Road. And to the south of the existing Center Village district, it extends down Boston Road to Summer Street. Proposed bylaw includes 12 sections. Just wanted to list these for you. They cover many of the typical zoning requirements that you would see in an overlay. So the final four slides are visual aids to provide a better understanding of the overlay. Some of this is a refresher from fall town meeting, but as I said, many of the principles are the same. As you can see, the bylaw is intended to encourage street activation. As you can see from the photos, interesting storefronts, outdoor dining, outdoor displays, and pocket parks. These are all examples that are currently within the Village Center and what the bylaw is promoting and encouraging. The bylaw talks about frontage zones. Frontage zones are essentially a manner in which to preserve and reserve the first floor of a building for commercial and office space and promote street-level activity, and reserving second or third floors for residential use. This is something that already is taking place historically and naturally within the Center Village. This slide represents a before and after as to what the overlay is attempting to accomplish. The above slide is a representative of Papagino's on Chelmsford Street. Under current zoning, the building would be in the center, surrounded by parking, limited landscaping, and limited street activity. The bottom slide, or the slide to the right of the picture, is what the overlay would require to be developed. Buildings pulled up front to the street, similar to other properties within the existing Center Village, parking on the side or rear. Final slide. These images are directly from the Center Village Master Plan, which has been reviewed extensively and approved by a number of town boards and committees. The overlay and the bylaw that's in front of you specifically talks to the brick walk. It has provisions in there that would ensure the viability and reservation of the easements and of the brick walk. So a beautiful feature such as this public amenity could be implemented via the overlay. That concludes this presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blansky. Now's the time for questions and answers of the proponent. I do not see any. So does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee has no recommendation.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Planning Board?
Planning Board unanimously recommends this article.
Now's the time for discussion.
Mr. Moderator, Bill Griffin, Precinct 9. I believe this should be fairly straightforward. I've proposed an amendment asking to amend the language within a subsection of the article. One part of the article refers to the inclusionary housing article in 21 that we just tabled. So within paragraph 195-124, subsection D, I propose that we strike in its entirety item 2, residential projects are subject to the requirements of Article 23, inclusionary housing bylaw.
That would be considered a friendly amendment by the planning board?
Okay. Any further discussion?
Fantasy Precinct 2, I'd like to make an amendment also.
Well, since we have a friendly amendment, we should vote on that first, and then we can address your amendment, unless you're amending the amendment that we're considering. Thank goodness. Okay. Any discussion on the amendment, which is a friendly amendment to strike item 2, 194, section 24, subsection D.
Just a question, Mr. Moderator. Did we get that in writing?
We do.
Okay.
It should be on the slide. D2. So we're waiting. It's 195-124, subsection D, item 2.
Page 53.
Page 53 in the warrant book.
Just item 2.
There you go. And this is a friendly amendment to clarify apparently a reference to an article that was withdrawn. So at this point, there being no discussion, if we're prepared to vote. So we are voting on the amendment, which is a friendly amendment. Right. We'll get in a minute. If we can see the other amendment while we're voting on this. And that amendment passes, 131 in favor, 2 opposed, and 3 abstentions.
One abstention? Three abstentions.
Mr. Tassi, while we're reviewing it, Town Council will be looking at it shortly. If you want to explain the purpose of your amendment.
Okay. My amendment is to, in the Article 23, Section C, and it is the first bullet, which is multifamily dwellings. And what I'd like to see is it change from visitor parking for 1 visitor parking for every 3 units. Right now, they have it at every 5 units. And I do believe that in the original zoning laws, they did have it 1 to 3. And the reason I'm stating this is because there are parking problems within these zones. This is just the first one. There are multiples. And I'd like to see there be enough parking. I mean, it's not unusual to see people have guests on multiple days or the same days, and you don't have parking. And to me, nothing more is more beautiful than driving down the street and seeing nothing but lined cars.
Yeah, we're trying to find that on the actual article itself. Yep. Mr. Tassi, you've got bullet C. What section are you referring to?
I am on page 108. Oh, 195 and 126.
26C.
126C.
Under multifamily dwellings.
See, this says, I move to amend, site, is he striking?
See what? See number 1. One space between 1.5 per bedroom, 2 dormer plus more.
Is he looking at here, multifamily dwelling? So he's amending 195
Yeah, to make it more
dash 26, section,
restricted.
195, 126, subsection C, number 1.
Does anyone have any questions for the proponent?
Does he want one visitor space?
it says here, and by substitute.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. Just a quick question. Do you just want it in 1 or 1 and 2?
Yeah.
I was looking for just 1,
One visitor space for every 3 units.
with the multi-family units. I wasn't looking for the age.
But I guess
Ms. Carter?
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. Just to help everybody put this in perspective, do we know under some of the existing condo complexes how many extra visitor spaces we have, what that ratio is?
Well, we know what the current zoning provisions require, so we can assume that any recent multifamily development would have a zoning approval from the planning board. So would you like me to recite the zoning requirements?
Yeah, if you could, and then if we, even like Williamsburg, because I know there are times when you're at Williamsburg and it's tough to find a visitor parking space, if anybody has any information on that?
Well, the zoning bylaw requires basically one space for every 3 units or fraction thereof. The overlay that we just approved in the fall was 1 space for every 5 visitors. So,
5 units.
right, sorry, 5 units.
3. He's just taking that 5 units.
He's just taking this.
Yep, and making that a 3.
You looking for a response at this point, or?
No. So I understand the amendment. So is there any other questions or discussions on this issue? Mr. Rue?
Mr. Moderator, are we in debate now, or?
Yes.
I would recommend against passing this amendment. This is I hate to use the term for Chelmsford, but a highly urbanized area. And this relates to visitors only, visitor parking spots. We're not expecting a large influx of dwelling units there. Maybe it's a recognition of the dwelling units that are, the units that are already in existence in the center and used as dwellings. We've gone over this back and forth a couple of times in the planning board meetings, and I'd urge you to keep it at one visitor parking space per 5 units because of the urbanized area, the fact that there is public parking, even though it's not very visible, and we're trying to work on improved signage, and we're also working on trying to get shared parking between the large parking lots in the area. So I'd urge the meeting to keep it at 1 per 5 units. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rue.
Maria Carafellis, Precinct 2. We're still on the amendment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with the amendment. I think that it should be changed. And along with that agreement, I also have a question. If we pass this amendment, either way, actually, how does this affect any 40B developments? Does this affect them at all?
It does not.
Okay, thank you.
Ruth Monahan, Precinct 3. The only thing that confuses me about this is if somebody currently has 1 per 5, where are they going to find the extra spaces to have 1 for 3? Does it mean that grassy areas are going to be paved over to make those extra spaces? I don't know.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment?
Kirk Marshall, Precinct 4. In the not-so-distant past, we debated an article, and Town Council said introducing amendments from the floor was ill-advised and not a good idea. And I'm just curious to ask Town Council right now, is it a good idea to be introducing amendments to this article?
Mr. Moderator, I would agree with the Town Council that making amendments at the last minute after a matter has already been debated and deliberated by the Planning Board is a difficult process. It can have unintended consequences. However, that ultimately is up to the town meeting as a policy decision.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? There being none, we will now be voting on the amendment, which is to change the number of units per parking space per unit.
For those who might not be familiar, the Village Center Overlay District is a proposal to create a kind of unified area within the center of town so that a more unified approach to development can be undertaken. You might know that there's been a master plan put in place, or at least proposed for that. That would,
The amendment fails.
That would
There were
really
41 yes
enhance a
votes,
lot of the
96
aspects of
no, and 1
downtown.
abstention. Now we go to the main article.
But in order to do that, you need a sort of unifying set of
As
principles that
amended by the
allows
friendly amendment by Mr. Griffin.
that allows broad application of the various regulations and zoning bylaws.
Andy Sillage, Precinct 7. I was a little slow a few minutes ago, and I have a question. Is it proper to ask a question?
Yes, it is.
All right. I was out of town when you had detailed meetings on this, but the last slide on your presentation shows a diagram, and I just want to understand that I explained it correctly. It seems like part of something on the left side of the street would move to something on the right-hand side of the street. That slide.
Well, the diagrams in the last slide were part of the Village Center Master Plan report and process. Those are conceptual in nature. They're not engineering. They're not final design plans. They're a what if or a vision.
And what is it that they're trying to tell me? What is the meaning of that last one on the right-hand side?
The one on the bottom?
Yes.
The one on the bottom is depicting the removal of a non-historic portion of the Oddfellows building on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right, it's depicting the concept of cutting out an existing part of a building to have an opening in it. The reason for including these is that brick walk is a critical component of the Center Village Master Plan vision. The bylaw that's being discussed tonight has specific provisions that would allow the flexibility of something like this to take place.
So if I owned the house on the left and I said I want to fix it up or rebuild it, and you would come and say, well, a good idea would be, why don't you build a new one on the right-hand side and demolish the one on the left-hand side?
It allows a property owner who has frontage along the brook, who wants to voluntarily participate in the overlay district, to come to the planning board with a proposal that removes existing building, and the bylaw allows that property owner or that applicant the ability to replace that square footage somewhere else on the property.
Thanks, I understand.
Mr. Moderator, Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1, from you to the speaker. I think it might be more legible for those people who don't understand that plan, that the picture on top on the right is the brook coming under the street, where it's on the bottom picture, that red there. The brook runs right under the street. The brick walk that's there is where the portion of that building is taken away. And if you see an opening across the street on the top picture, that's where one of Mr. Handley's buildings is going to be either eliminated or have an archway put in there so that the brook is visible and you'll be able to walk from that side of the street to this side of the street with the brook running under it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. I understand what you're doing, and I'm going to vote for it, but one big concern I have is you're mixing residential with business, and a good example, what I was thinking would be if you're picking up trash. Are you going to have residents going to be screaming at you because your business is picking up trash at 5 o'clock in the morning? Situations like that. Sure. Just something to think about. Thank you.
Brian Lattina, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, were all the people that own the property under this overlay district notified by postcard as was promised to previous town meetings?
This bylaw was, the property owners that were within the overlay did receive direct notification of the planning board public hearing. They were also heavily involved in the Center Village master planning process.
So they did receive a postcard
yes,
and were notified.
correct.
Thank you.
Ken Tassi, Precinct 2. I keep hearing shared parking. I do not think that that's going to work. Unless you own both pieces of the property and you're going to share amongst those two, there's no way that's going to work. I wouldn't take on someone else's liability of someone else's patrons parking in my parking lot to go to their business or to visit a friend or anything like that. I just don't, this whole shared parking thing just doesn't seem like it's going to really work.
Thank you.
Dave Dubinsky, Precinct 2. Mr. Moderator, through you to the presenter. Just as a point of clarification and to follow up on a previous speaker's question, Williamsburg has 2 deeded spots per unit. So that's 535 units, two spots per unit. We have 3 large overflow lots. I can't be specific about the numbers, but they really take care of a lot of visitors. In the 100, 200 area, in the 300 area, and the 400 to 500 area. We have a medium-sized overflow lot in the 600 area, and we have a small overflow lot right across from where my wife and I live that would handle 5 spaces. Now, I'm a trustee with Williamsburg. So I'm wearing 2 hats. On the trustee side of Williamsburg, I'm a traffic cop and a parking violation cop. That's because the police don't enforce this. That's a different story. Anyway, that was an aside. The problem that I see, having been in the role of a trustee in Williamsburg, and as it relates to what's happening here in this discussion, it goes back to what I refer to as immediate gratification. So visitors come, and they can't find a spot close to where they want to be, even though there's a spot maybe a block away in a legal public area, they'll park wherever they feel like parking. So my solution is aggressive enforcement of, with respect to violators. I don't necessarily think that there's a problem with the spatial environment as much as there might be one with respect to enforcement.
Thank you.
Frances McDougall, Precinct 1. I want to address this in that I hope we're all on the same page, that this is the center district we're talking about. We're not talking about other multiple family properties. We're talking about the center. If anyone has had the opportunity to watch this presentation for the center renovation, it's a gem. It's absolutely fabulous, and you would love every bit of it. I expect that if you see those scissors for the first time, you might think it a little strange. But I can assure you that at the meetings that I was present at, Jack Hanley was there, who owns the property on the right side, and he thought it was cute too to have a pair of scissors there. He is part of the planning on this, and that brook has been hidden from us for many, many years. The feral cats live under there. I have stood working on campaigns in that little store, hearing that water going under my feet. It's a gem. It's a gem. I hope you all vote for this.
Thank you.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1, Mr. Moderator, to the present speaker. I just wanted to point out a previous speaker was concerned about notification of people, and I was a member of the Center Village Master Plan, and I just wanted to assure everyone here that every meeting we had the stakeholders from the center there. They are all in favor of it. They've all been notified. We have had every board in town that needed to approve it, approved it. So we've really done a lot of work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further discussion, we will be voting on the main article as amended by Mr. Griffin to approve the Village Center Overlay District. Okay. This required a 2/3 vote, and it does pass. 126 in favor, 10 opposed, and 1 abstention. Article 24.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 24 is the authorization to acquire drainage easements at Bailey Terrace and 7 Oak Knoll Avenue. They're shown here on the plans. Basically, Bailey Terrace and Oak Knoll are in East Chelmsford, off of Riverneck Road, near Gorham Street. The town engineer has worked with the both property owners. This is part of a drainage project. Property owners have consented. There's no monetary exchange by the town for the project. It's just by securing these easements, we'll be able to legally and properly do the project and improve the drainage in that section of roadway. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Any questions on this article? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee has no recommendation.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Time for discussion? I see no one queuing up for discussion, so we will be voting on Article 24 to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire drainage easements on 5 Bailey Terrace and 7 Oak Knoll Avenue.
Article 27.
The article passes, 133 in favor, 1 opposed. No abstentions. And this is the last article of the evening and on the warrant, Article 27, electricity aggregation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bob Andrews. I am the current chair of the Energy Conservation Committee in the town. There's one other member here tonight, Gary Krauk, who's in the back with us. We normally work with Gary Persichetti and Paul Cohen and Kathleen Canavan on your town buildings, looking over ways to save energy and use energy more wisely. Tonight, we're going to present an article that actually does not affect town buildings, but has the ability to potentially reduce costs for residences and businesses in the town of Chelmsford instead. So this lists the members of the community, the members of the committee. We're currently looking for volunteers if anyone has the talents and energy and wants to join us. Community choice aggregation is the ability for a community to go out and purchase on behalf of the residents and the businesses a quantity of electricity to be distributed amongst the townspeople. This was enabled back when Massachusetts entered utility deregulation, and they separated the purchase of electricity generation from electricity distribution. We're all familiar with the concept of going to either Costco or BJ's and buying toilet paper in quantity, which, depending on how many people are in your house, lasts for 6 days or 6 months, depending on your storage. But the town would be able to purchase electricity of a quantity to support all the electricity used by residents for a period of a year, and therefore lock in pricing and also take advantage of better pricing because of the bulk purchase. There's also an ability, as part of the purchase requirement, to select a mixture of electricity generation methods. We could get pricing for all normal electricity generation methods, which may include, a diesel-fired generator or a natural gas generator, potentially coal plant, and a little bit of wind and solar thrown in, or we could go all the way the other direction and purchase all solar or all wind or a mix of 50% solar and wind, and that all affects the pricing. So what we want to do with this article is study this possibility. The slide in front of you describes the enabling legislation which allows a community to set aside this program and pursue the purchase of the electricity on behalf of the residents. The opportunity here, as it says, is to lower the power rates. This is the main reason that we're going for this. However, again, I want to say this covers only the supply or the generation of the electricity. National Grid will still handle the distribution, maintain the power lines. They're the ones that we call after we've had the ice storm and the snowstorm, and they're the ones that continue to bill all of the residents and the businesses in town. It's just that the arrangement is made with National Grid as a pass-through on the purchase of the electricity. Right now, National Grid purchases electricity on our behalf based on historic usage patterns. Customers that already purchase electricity through either some sort of other organization they might belong to, or large commercial users that purchase electricity on the wholesale market can opt out of this program at any time, or in fact immediately. This is subject to all of the public purchase rules and regulations that the town currently follows. Sorry, I was a slide ahead. The bottom line is most important. As everyone reads it and nods their heads, there is no cost to the town for this program. What we're looking for is permission to get a consultant to help us explore this. So you can see that Massachusetts actually started this fairly early. Massachusetts has been on the forefront of energy policy for many years. In fact, Massachusetts is currently the #1 state in the country in terms of energy usage and energy efficiency. We're even beating California, which is going some. These are current aggregation communities in the Commonwealth. The Cape Light Compact impacts all of the towns on Cape Cod. I don't believe Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are involved, but all of those towns joined together a while ago in order to purchase electricity because they're limited in their means to get electricity onto the Cape. So this is what we have for timeline. And again, it's important to note that this is a timeline, this is not a duration. So after town meeting approval, which would be month 1, we then move to coordinating with the Department of Energy Resources. We work with National Grid, finalize the plan. Then we have to get our plan into the Department of Public Utility for review, which takes time. Once we finally get approval from the Department of Public Utilities, we can then move into getting an RFP out for suppliers. We negotiate a contract and execute the contract and then start producing the electricity. So this is a broad brush outline of the process. What we want to do is we want to retain a consultant who has experience in aggregation, who has relationships with suppliers, who will help us go to the market, find out the pricing, put together a plan that will get reviewed by the Department of Energy Resources and approved by DPU, and will coordinate with National Grid. The other thing that the consultant will do for us is publicize it and help us educate the community so that everyone who wants to participate may participate and understands what's going on, and those who don't want to participate know how they can opt out. It's also important here, the middle bullet, the supplier pays the consultant for us as part of the agreement. So the consultant helps us educate. There's a number of ways that we can get the message out to townspeople. A couple that occurred to me after we put together the presentation. We could have public meetings either here or at the library and reach out to people. We want everyone to understand what the benefits are and what the responsibilities are, and especially those who want to opt out. This is an example calculation. Let me underline and underscore the word example. This is by no means a promise. However, townspeople in Chelmsford, residences and small businesses, use approximately 176 million estimated kilowatt hours on an annual basis. If we save a penny on the electric generation rate, it's potentially $1.7 million of money going back into the pockets of the residents and the businesses that participate in the program. Again, it's an example, but it's a real example. The potential is there. Currently, Massachusetts is paying somewhere between 13 and 16 cents all in for electricity. It's a fairly high number, but that's where we are and what we have to do. There's a potential to gain this savings, maybe more. I don't want to promise anybody any numbers, but this is about savings. What we're looking at is buying in bulk. So here we are, step 1. We're looking for permission to go find a consultant to help us find out what we can do and publicize the program. No, sorry. Back to that. No, my last slide supposed to be says, thank you, and are there any questions?
Thank you, and are there any questions? I see no one asking questions. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee has no recommendation.
Board of Selectmen,
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
time for discussion.
Great. Matt Hansen, Precinct 1. Great presentation, Bob. Thank you. I just want to quickly say thank you very much for presenting tonight, and to everyone here. I think this is a fantastic way for the town of Chelmsford to be able to give something back to the residents. I know during all of my campaigns, a lot of people always ask the Board of Selectmen to pursue ways to either save money or to provide tax relief or to do things more efficient. This isn't a way to provide tax relief per se, but it is one way that's sort of thinking out of the box for the town to save the residents money, even though it's not part of their tax bill. It's just a way that we can benefit residents. I know it sort of seems like one of those things that may be too good to be true. You can save money and it doesn't cost anything, but it is sort of one of those examples. So I just hope everyone will consider supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Any further discussion? There being none, it will be time to vote on Article 27, Municipal Electricity Aggregation.
Thank you so much. Another one in the can. Yeah. So, Roy.
Well, you never know. We might have another meeting soon.
The article passes, 125 in favor, 6 opposed. Like to thank all of you. Happy Cinco de Mayo, and we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor, raise your tickets. Thank you very much.
Let's try that again. With that motion to adjourn, we bring to a close the third night of the spring session of the annual town meeting. And it's been a great demonstration of civic action. We went through about 25 articles on the warrant. As is typical, the budget took center stage, and we now have a budget for the coming year of approximately $111 for the operating budget, and then another $3 million in capital improvements. In there is a $1.2 million fire engine that will be coming to a fire station near you, along with some, down at the small end, $2,000 that will be expended for some signs promoting the historic villages in North Chelmsford, West, and South Chelmsford. As expected, the grinder pump issue, Article number 25, took the lion's share of time. In fact, last Thursday night it was the only article debated, and fortunately it was passed, so that is a chapter that will be moving forward in the town's involvement with this issue. I just want to mention that tonight marks the conclusion of the first round of moderating by our new moderator, John Kurland, who has brought a new voice to this session. He's now the third moderator that I have seen in action. Well, fourth if you count Mike McCall, because John Kurland has a grinder pump. Last Thursday night he recused himself, and Mike McCall stepped forward to serve as a temporary moderator. In any case, the debate was sometimes lively, but always restrained, and I think we all benefited from that. It seemed to move briskly, especially tonight. We got through about 15 warrant articles, and we're all grateful that we don't have to go to a fourth night because we'd all rather be watching Bruins games than the Red Sox, right? No, not necessarily. This is important stuff, and we look forward to seeing you next fall for the fall edition, and of course at the 4th of July parade, and hear it about the town of Chelmsford. I want to thank the staff and the volunteers for Chelmsford Telemedia, who as always bring you this fine presentation. It takes a lot of time to set up these cameras and wires. We also do the audio-visual setup for the town here to so that everyone here in the senior center can see this. So that's a little shout out to you guys. So that's it for me, Kelly Beatty. Thanks again for joining us. See you next spring.